Hello. Today I want to talk to you about text analysis. We've done a lot about visual analysis and I think it's time to catch up a bit with text. Now, very importantly, with media analysis you want to understand how texts work, you want to understand the mechanics of the logics behind what you read. And in order to get a scientific approach to texts, you need to understand a couple of things about the logics of text. So the first thing to understand is that text and visuals are very different in the way they approach our brains. While visuals are always something that comes to you instantly and as a whole, holistically, text is something that comes to you bit by bit and one item after the other. So over time, you will have a linear logics of how text is ordered, as opposed to visuals, which you get as one. The second difference that you have between text and visuals is that visuals have a more direct approach to your emotionality, to things that are more or maybe less rationally reflected, and that are directer in their impact on you. Verbal communication, text, tends to be more appealing towards the rationality, towards logics, towards that which is more directly accessible for your critical understanding. Now this is very important because there is a false belief that you're kind of safe with text because you can really always see on the surface whether whatever is being said is true or false, whether it's being honest or dishonest, and that is actually absolutely not the case. And that's one of the reasons why you want to be very good in analyzing text, because texts can lie, and text can actually create a lot of illusions, and text can be manipulative. Text can have underlying texts that these undercurrents of text can actually have a strong impact on you emotionally, can have a strong impact on you as far as your opinions and of your worldview is concerned. So let's take a closer look at how text works so we understand how we can actually analyze it, and that always means how we can critically approach it and deconstruct it. Structure of text is always aligned from left to right, from now to then, over time or over space in a linear fashion, as opposed to, let's say, a drawing where you will see a picture of something on first sight, and you will see, like for example, a person, let's say, read a book. So the picture you see of that person, the vision will not have a structure, it'll be just nice on the first sight. And then the complicated logics begin of how to analyze how our eyes actually follow different parts of the picture and how that is then reassembled in our brains. And that's a whole different chapter. For the time being, if we look at text, we will see it's the difference of linear structure versus holistic. Now, this structure is the superficial structure. It's the text as we see it in a book, for example. But the deep structure of text, the structure of its inner logics, actually is non-linear. Let's take a look at a sentence like, Peter's reading a book. So you have the superficial structure of Peter 1 is 2, reading 3, A 4, book 5. You have one item after the other. But if you look at the deep structure of that, even only from the perspective of grammar, you will find that this is actually not as in a visual one whole thing that you see immediately and grasp as one, but actually something that is structured as Peter is connected. Those two parts are part of one part, and this part relates to is reading, reading is connected grammatically, and Peter's reading is related to the unit a book. A is related to book, and so on and so forth. So you get actually a tree structure of relations that you could then sort as nominal phrase, verbal phrase, and then you could actually look into the grammatical structure of that. But this is not what this is about. This is only to show that the content is structured in a nonlinear fashion. So this brings us to two main central terms of text analysis, and that is text coherence and text cohesion. Text coherence is how a text is logically linked on the inside, on the level of deep structure. Text cohesion is how a text is linked superficially on the text surface. So you will see relations as Peter is and is reading and a to book are links that are on the surface of the text, which is text cohesion. But the text coherence is what makes it a unit that makes sense and that belongs together, and that is why it's a logical sentence, or a sentence that makes sense, or something that has inner coherence. So let's take a closer look at the different kinds of text coherence and text cohesion. I'll give you an example. Let's take a look at the sentence, the mini text with the second sentence, where we'd say the first sentence was Peter's reading a book, and the second sentence is the book is quite good. So again, we have a superficial structure, and we can see like the and book belong together, and they are the nominal phrase that belongs to is. How is it? It is good. Good. How is it good? It is quite good. And so you can see how this sentence is structured. But there is a link that reaches over the boundaries of a mere sentence, and that links the first sentence with the second sentence, and that is a very small grammatical detail actually. It's here. The two sentences are linked cohesively on the text level because the definite article, the, in the book is quite good, is actually referring to a known object from previous information, and that is the a book from the previous sentence. So Peter's reading a book is related to the book is quite good via the cohesion of the and a, which are linking together on the surface of the text. That's the cohesion. The coherence of the two text bits, text parts, or partial text, is that it's actually quite logical that we keep talking about what we've started talking about in the first sentence. Now, in the first sentence, we had somebody doing something with something, and in the second sentence, we're talking about this closer, taking a closer look at what this something is, the book. We're qualifying the book. So this is already a kind of analysis that is essential for developing good style in writing, but also very important in text analysis, and that is the thema-rima analysis. So thema-rima analysis takes a look at what we're talking about and what we're saying about this, what we're talking about. The thema of the sentence Peter is reading a book, I wonder whether you can guess what it is. Peter's the thema. We're talking about Peter, and we're saying something specific about Peter. What are we saying about Peter? That's the rima, that he's reading a book. So the topic, if you may, is Peter, and what we have to say about that topic is he's reading a book. If we take a look at the second sentence, what are we talking about? We're talking about the book. And what we have to say about this book is that it's quite good or bad or whatever. So what we have in the second sentence is the thema, the book, and the rima is quite good. Now, here's a typical progression of text that actually makes text coherent, and that is that if you have a thema 1 and you say something about this being rima 1, which is, what is Peter doing? He is, rima 1, reading a book. Then rima 1 in a coherent text becomes thema 2. And then we're talking about the book. And we are progressing in our text. Now we're saying something about the book, and what we're saying about the book is rima 2. It's quite good. So there you have it. There you have a linkage between the surface of the text and the deep structure of the text, and how the two are linked together, because what we're talking about in the second sentence is what we have been saying about what we've been talking about in the first sentence. So we're saying something about Peter in the first sentence, and what we've been saying about this will become the object of what we will be saying something about in the second sentence. And thus, the two sentences are linked, or, in other words, coherent. That's how text coherence works. Now, if you want to analyze a text, you want to understand the inner logics or the deep structure of a text, and that means you're looking for all kinds of means of finding these inner connections of text, how text is linked, how it is logically coherent. So you're looking for the means of text coherence. That's the key to text analysis. So if we're talking about text coherence, then we want to address all those things that have to do with how the parts of a text are linked in the deep structure of the text. So we've talked a bit about the surface of the text and the surface structure when we were talking about Peter is reading a book. Then we knew that Peter and is linked cohesively through grammar. So we have elements of grammar that are responsible for text cohesion. We have, for example, elements of syntax. Those are the rules of which part of the sentence sticks to which part of the sentence. We have rules of syntax that actually relate to more than the unit of the sentence, which would be Peter's reading a book. The book is quite good. An example for syntax that extends its rule over the borders of a mere sentence. But we also have grammatical rules concerning, for example, the use of how to match up the form of a verb and whom it relates to. So all that is part of cohesion on the surface of the structure of text. But when we talk about coherence, we talk about the stuff that we cannot see on the surface of the text. So this is all about what we understand, but we do not say. So what we express without explicitly saying it. And that's where text analysis becomes really interesting. So if grammar and syntax may be a bit less interesting, although I'll give you other examples for that, the most interesting bits are on the level of semantics. So semantics is the field of meaning, semantics. And in the field of semantics, we have questions like metaphors. And we've talked about metaphors before when we were talking about the analysis of visuals, because their metaphors play a role. Well, in text they play a very important role too. But other than metaphors, we also may want to look at questions like how is the wording, what kind of expressions are used to name specific actors, for example. Okay, so we know now that text cohesion is the kind of linkage of, or linkedness of text on the surface of the text. That's what we see immediately when we look at a text. But what we are interested in is the inner logics, the inner workings of text. That's what we want to analyze. And for that, we need to understand text coherence. Text coherence is what relates to the deep structure of text. And we've had the example of thema-rima analysis. That was the first step of depth structure of text analysis. Now, let me tell you that text coherence is anything that links text in the deep structure, that makes it coherent, and that means it is that which is somehow said, but it is not said. It is not explicitly stated, it is somehow implicitly stated. It is something that we understand, and that what makes us say, this is a logical text, or it's kind of not logical, it's all over the place, because we have a feeling for coherence or incoherence. But it is also a dangerous place, because that is where we can smuggle in meaning that is not explicitly stated, and that can only be shown by analytically, critically thinking about it. So learning to analyze text is also always sharpening your tools of critical understanding of text. Or text analysis, from a more radical perspective, is criticism. So let's take a look at the tools we have for this. Well, as you've already seen, there's a lot of grammar going on in terms of text cohesion. We had rules of syntaxes, for example, that would be concerning what you can stick together with what in a sentence, in which order, those kind of rules. And you'd have like the rules, for example, for using the definite article or the indefinite article as a rule that constitutes actual cohesion between sentences by making them stick together in terms of rules that apply on the surface of the text. We have also rules of grammar that have more depth structure meaning, as for example, when we refer to a group of people as we, first person singular. So this would be grammar in the sense of how often does the president in his speech or her speech use the first person plural. So this is also quite indicative of how this person is appealing to others, how this person is appealing to their emotions, how it's trying to create a sense of unity and politically to actually mobilize people feeling positive towards him or her. Other examples would be on the level of meaning or semantics. Semantics are all about meaning. And you know that there are different fields of semantics. There's the field of, let's say, war, where everything that's related to war is part of that semantic field. And you would understand that tanks and airplanes and ships in this context would have a specific semantics. The semantic field of war then would point towards those being battleships and battle tanks and fighter planes and the like, bombers. So Interestingly, the coherence of texts can be studied especially with those parts of semantics that are not so explicit in what is it exactly you've been saying. So one of the things we tend to avoid in science is the use of metaphors, and this is very rich for the analysis of texts, because there's a rich field of stuff that, in the deep structure of text that you can get out into the open if you analyze metaphors. Now, that has a reason. This reason is, if we stick to the semantic field of war, for example, that if you look at the structure of metaphors, there is a tendency that we seem to build metaphors in a specific coherent way to understand one thing in terms of another. This is something that goes back to the authors Johnson, and I've talked about that earlier, and actually I'll get you a book. So this is something that goes back to the authors Lakoff and Johnson, and this is an interesting book of George Lakoff that is now actually referring this to the political context. Very interesting. And what it basically is, these two guys talked about since the 80s, they came up in the mid-80s with this idea, is that we understand one concept in terms of another. Let's take, for example, argument. So they claim, if you take a closer look at the metaphorical field of ways of talking about arguments, you'll find that the basic concept of understanding arguments is of arguments as war. So we fought him in the argument, but we lost. We tried to stand our ground, but we had to retreat when he came up with this brilliant argument. It was sharp as a sword, and his words cut deep, and so on and so forth. And we'll see that on the surface of text, there's actually no real cohesion between these words, as in standing ground, as in retreating and attacking, defending, and so on and so forth. But on the metaphorical level, there is a clear coherence between these words. So, and this coherence is in the deep structure, and the deep structure here is the example, argument is war. Argument was war links together the concepts of defense, defend, attack, stand or lose ground, and so on and so forth. They are all related to one basic concept, and that is the super metaphor, argument is war. So they are all small little metaphors that are linked together by one metaphorical concept. And if you take a look at problematic metaphors, like, for example, the metaphor of refugees are a flood, or migrants are a flood. Migrants are a flood. Then it's quite easy to understand how racist or xenophobe texts are coherent, although if you think about it, there is no clear connection between, there is like the influx or inflow of migrants. We are surrounded by a sea of refugees. We are the waves, there's a new wave of refugees. The waves are breaking over the borders, and so on and so forth. It is actually a concept that brings together being flooded by migrants, breaching the dam, and so on and so forth. Those all are seemingly incoherent words on the surface of the text, but in the deep structure of the text, they have a meaning. They all point to one metaphor, and the super metaphor is migrants are a flood, which means they're too many, they're a danger, they're a threat, and they're dehumanized, they do not have a face, they're only mass, and so on and so forth. All these concepts are included in one great big, so to say, metaphor that is overarching the concept of a lot of details of what some people, racist, xenophobes, say. So there you have it. The analysis of metaphors can be very helpful to understand the deep structure or coherence of texts.